Welcome to Washington Watch with Congressman Walter Jones. Each month, we take a look at the events happening in Washington, D.C. and how they affect our lives here in Eastern North Carolina. And now, here's your Congressman, Walter Jones.
Welcome to the April edition of Washington Watch. Today's guest, I am actually honored and thrilled to have Comptroller General David Walker. In 1998, Mr. Walker began his 15-year term as Comptroller General and head of the United States Government Accountability Office, known as GAO, where he serves as the nation's Chief Accountability Officer. Before his appointment as Comptroller General, Mr. Walker had extensive executive-level experience in both government and private industry. Mr. Walker is married with two adult children, Carol and Andy. David Walker, I am pleased and honored that you will be on our show today.
It's my pleasure. Good to be with you, Congressman.
David, let me start right off by reading from a news article that I have used so many times in my district. You and others had an economic summit, so to speak, in Washington, D.C. The Washington Post carried the comments by you and others, and the title is Almost Unnoticed Bipartisan Budget Anxiety. I want to read 3 paragraphs, and then I'm going to let you just take the show over from there. With startling unanimity, they agreed that without some combination of big tax increases and major cuts in Medicare, Social Security, and most other spending, the country will fall victim to the huge debt and soaring interest rates that collapsed Argentina's economy, and caused riots in its streets a few years ago. I read further. This is a quote now from you. The only thing the United States is able to do a little after 2040 is pay interest on massive and growing federal debt. Walker said, the model blows up in the mid-2040s. What does that mean, Argentina? The last part that you are mentioned in the article, Walker put U.S. debt and obligations at $45 trillion in current dollars, almost as much as the total net worth of all Americans, or $150,000 per person. Balancing the budget in 2040, he said, could require cutting total federal spending as much as 60% or raising taxes 2.5 times today's levels. David, again, I want to thank you for being on this show. The people of Eastern North Carolina, the 3rd Congressional District that I represent, are extremely concerned about the debt and the deficit of this nation.
Well, thank you very much, Congressman. First, let me give you a few facts that I think you're aware of, but it's important that your constituents be aware of. The United States' financial condition is worse than advertised. We face large and growing structural deficits due primarily to known demographic trends, rising health care costs, and lower federal revenues as a percentage of the economy than historically has been the case. Last year, fiscal 2005, we had the highest deficit on an accrual basis in the history of the United States, $760 billion, a 35% negative bottom line. We've gone from $20 trillion in total liabilities and unfunded commitments in 2000 to $46 trillion in 5 years. That's $156,000 for every man, woman, and child, $375,000 per full-time worker, and it's growing every second of every minute of every day because we're still running deficits. We've got demographic challenges, and we have compounding interest costs. We're a debtor, and so compounding works against us. We've got to change course. We've got to make dramatic and fundamental changes, and the sooner the better because the clock is ticking.
David, let me ask you, many of my constituents and I myself are concerned that the foreign governments continue to buy more and more of our debt and through bonds and treasury notes and financial instruments. I'm going to ask you the same question I asked Alan Greenspan about 6 months ago. As this debt and deficit continues to soar, do you see where along the line, let me give this scenario that, let's say that China, who is putting so much of our money, quite frankly, into their military, building their Navy and their Air Force, do you see a time where possibly it could happen that China might say, if they continue to buy our debt, which they might stop that at some point, but if they continue to buy our debt, that they could actually blackmail America and say, we're going to go in and we want to unify South Korea with North Korea, and therefore we're going to send our military in, and America says, oh, no, you're not. And they say, well, okay, if you don't want us to, then we'll play with your markets, your financial markets.
Well, you know, it's good news and bad news that we have foreign players, whether it's China, Japan, Korea, OPEC nations, whatever, who are willing to buy our debt. The good news is we need them to buy our debt because we have among the lowest savings rates of any country in the world. In fact, last year, the United States, Americans as a whole, as individuals, they spent more than they made. We had a negative savings rate, first time since 1933. The government's running huge deficits, therefore we have to go to others to finance our excess consumption. So they're willing to do that. The bad news is we are ceding more and more of our future destiny to others. And therefore that means that we have less leverage on them, they have more leverage on us, and if they decide that they no longer wish to buy as many of our Treasury securities as they have, then we're going to have to raise the money someplace else. That means higher interest rates, and it compounds our problem. So I do think it's not prudent for us to rely to the extent that we have on foreign players to finance our deficits because we lose some control over our future.
David, I want you to bring up, because in this article you made mention, and I did when I read the paragraph, about Medicare. You know, I was one of 25 Republicans 2 years ago to vote against the Medicare prescription drug bill, mainly because I did not think it was going to do what was necessary to reform Medicare, and I did not think that the prescription drug part of it, we could afford it, quite frankly.
Right.
I know you have some strong opinions in here. Could you speak briefly?
Well, the answer is, Congressman, you were right. Basically, we were in a situation where Medicare already had unfunded promises of $15 to $20 trillion, and the Medicare prescription drug bill added another $8 trillion in unfunded promises to Medicare's already a huge gap. That $8 trillion was over 1.5 times the gap for Social Security. There's no way we could afford it. It was not properly designed, it has not been effectively implemented, and it was fiscally irresponsible. And so now we're in a situation where that's one of the reasons we've gone from $20 trillion in liabilities and unfunded commitments in 2000 to $46 trillion plus in just 5 years. Now, it's not that we don't need to reform Medicare. We do. But we can't layer on top of a program that was designed in 1965 that was already unaffordable, unsustainable. We need to engage in much more dramatic and fundamental reform rather than just layering things on top, because we're not going to be able to deliver on all these promises over the long term. There's no question about that.
David, you know, this past week the Senate, the House had already voted, and I did not vote for it, to raise the debt limit. But the Senate did. I think they raised it to $9 trillion, and you can correct me on that. David, what bothers me as an American citizen, not so much as a congressman, but an American citizen, is that the Congress, and I will blame, you know, my party, quite frankly. I came to Washington with Newt Gingrich in 1995, and we had a contract with America, and one of our contract items was that we would balance the budget. And somewhere along the way, we went a different direction. I voted for President Bush twice, but it seems like in the 5 years that he's been in office, we have, as a Congress, had to raise the debt limit at least 4 times. Maybe it's 5, but at least 4 times that I can recall. Raising that debt limit adds to the problem that you're talking about. Am I right or wrong on that?
Well, here's the problem, Congressman. From a practical standpoint, we have to raise the debt limit, because if we don't raise the debt limit, then we'll default. And we obviously don't want to default on our debt. That would have cataclysmic consequences. So what we need to do is, what is causing us to be in a situation where we have to continually raise the debt limit, and what can we do to get better control of our fiscal affairs, both for today and tomorrow, to reduce the need to do that and hopefully eventually possibly eliminate it. That's where we have to look at reimposing budget controls. We have to look ultimately at reforming entitlement programs, re-engineering the entire base of discretionary spending, and looking at tax policy. We're going to have to do all three, because the gap is so great between what our projected expenditures are and what our projected revenues are. We're going to have to do all three. There's no way we're going to grow our way out of the problem or only do one or two of those three.
David, you mentioned tax policy, and many people were critical, maybe I was at the time, of Lyndon Johnson and the war in Vietnam, about the part of it that says you can't guns and butter. You can't have guns and butter at the same time. And here we are in Iraq, and we're not going to debate that policy, but we are in Iraq, and we're spending roughly $1.5 billion a week. I think that's what the figure is. But making those statements, I want to go back to what you were saying about tax policy. I have voted for tax relief for the American people, but I'm getting to a point, I would not vote for tax increases, but I'm getting to a point I'm not sure it's good, sound policy to vote for tax relief when you've got all these soaring debts and deficit and the expenditure of a war in Iraq.
Well, let me say several things. First, obviously we want to minimize tax burdens, because the more taxes you have, the less you have in the economy, the less you have for innovation, for productivity, for growing the economy, the less disposable income that people have. So obviously you want to minimize taxes. At the same point in time, in the final analysis, you've got to generate enough revenues to pay your current bills and deliver on your future promises. And we're a long way away from that. The other thing that I think a lot of people don't understand is that while some tax cuts stimulate the economy, very, very few, if any, tax cuts pay for themselves. And therefore, we need to recognize reality that yes, we have to reduce spending and re-engineer spending. And yes, we have to reform entitlement programs. But in the end, we're going to have to do something on the revenue side as well. Hopefully we can minimize it, but in the end, we've got to have enough revenues to pay our current bills and deliver on our future promises. Because if we don't, your children, my children, and I now have 3 grandchildren, are going to bear a tremendous burden. And that's frankly just not fair.
No, it's not. And David, from that article, I've used this again, as I said earlier, many, many times, because you're an expert, and I appreciate your positions because you, in my opinion, you speak the economic truth about what is happening to this nation. And I know that when you were talking about 2040 and the either 60% cut in federal programs if we don't do something along the way, or 2.5 times, and I was speaking to a high school group recently, and they wanted me to give an example of 2.5 times, and I said, well, for the sake of this discussion, let's use $100,000, and let's say the tax rate, and it's probably close to this, is roughly 30%. So you take 30% today on 100,000. If you were making 100,000 and you had to increase the federal taxes by 2.5 times, I said you'd be talking about $75,000 in taxes coming out of the 100,000 if we had to go to 2.5 times of what the taxes are today.
Well, the bottom line is that there's no way we should wait to reform programs. There's no way that we should default solely to revenue increases. That would have cataclysmic effects on economic growth. It would have cataclysmic effects on disposable income. It would have cataclysmic effects on the standard of living of American people. And so my point is this. The facts are clear and compelling. The first thing we need to do is to try to slow and then stop the bleeding, meaning the deficit's the bottom line. And then we need to recognize that within 5 years, the baby boom generation starts to retire. That will end up significantly increasing the cost of Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid, and we are not well prepared. So we need to start taking steps to reform those programs. And frankly, Congressman, what I found, a vast majority of the federal government's policies, programs, functions, and activities are based on the 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s, and we need to re-engineer it for the 21st century. A lot of those make sense. A lot of them don't make any sense, and there's a lot of duplication.
David, I think if the American people could hear you speak in all the congressional districts, which obviously they can't, if they could hear you speak with your knowledge and your advice, quite frankly, then maybe the congressman could better convince the district and the people in the district that, the train wreck's coming. And if we don't do something, it's going to be, I think, as you said, every year we're getting worse, we're getting closer to 2040. We've got to do a better job in Congress, and some of my colleagues on my side, as well as the Democratic side, I think are speaking out and speaking out loudly. I do back in the district. But if I was going to ask you, Social Security, we got about 3 minutes, and I need to close a minute before that, by the way. where do you see, what do we need to do about Social Security?
Sure. Well, first, I used to be a trustee of Social Security and Medicare from 1990 to 1995, and I've been on a couple of Social Security reform commissions. The irony is, Social Security reform should be easy because you know what the deficit is, and there is a way to reform Social Security where you can exceed the expectation of every generation of Americans. It's about a $5.7 trillion problem. Medicare's $30 trillion. Let me give you an idea about roughly where you go on Social Security. You could say that individuals who are retired or who are close to retirement, you don't make any changes because it wouldn't be fair. They don't have time to make changes. They don't have alternative actions. Then you take whatever age that might be, and the younger you are, the more changes you're going to make to your current benefit.
Right.
Normal retirement age, replacement rates, indexing formulas. And the reason it's done that way is that way it's gradual. That way the younger you are, the more time you'll have to make alternative adjustments. You can do that, and every generation gets more money than they think they're going to get. Not more than the current program promises, but more than they think they're going to get. I call that a win.
Absolutely.
The difficulty is there's not a whole lot of credibility to reform Social Security, which has a $5.7 trillion deficit, when Congress just added, and you voted against, I might note, an $8.7 trillion increase.
Right.
And there's a credibility gap. Last thing, I'm trying to help you and your members by stating the facts and speaking the truth and tilling the ground so that the American people understand that their elected representatives are going to have to make some very tough choices, because it isn't going to be pleasant, but it is essential for the future of our country, our kids, and our grandkids.
Absolutely. David, let me ask you, is Congress listening to you? Are the people in the right committees and the right leadership, I'm not in the leadership obviously, but are they listening to you?
They're listening, they're hearing, but not heeding enough. It's getting better. And I'm hopeful, and I'm an optimist. America has faced America has faced great challenges in the past. We've always risen to the challenge. People don't understand the seriousnesses of this.
Right.
This threatens the future of our country, the future of our families. We need to take it seriously. We need to start soon.
David, I am actually, I don't know how many of these articles I have photostated, and as you can tell, I marked the points I want people to see. I carry these to civic clubs. Anywhere I get a chance to speak, other than in churches, and I get a chance to speak at churches, but I carry this, and I said, this man is an expert. He's not a Democrat or Republican. There's not anything that he wants but to help economically save America for our children and grandchildren. David, we've got 20 seconds, so I'm going to close. I want to thank you. This has been one of the best shows we've had. I've been doing this for about 6, 7 years now. Thank you for what you're doing for America. Thank you for what you're doing for our children and grandchildren. In just a few seconds, Glenn Downs, my Chief of Staff, will be on the show, and we'll talk about some issues that are of great importance to the people of the 3rd District. Thank you, David Walker.
Thank you, Congressman.
Thank you. That was great. Thank you. Welcome to the second half of the April edition of Washington Watch. I'm delighted now to have Glenn Downs, my Chief of Staff. He's been with me 12 years. He's served the people of Eastern North Carolina, and certainly he's done a great job as my Chief of Staff. And I'm delighted, Glenn, that we have this time to talk about the issues that face the 3rd District.
Congressman, thank you very much. As always, in your congressional office, you get a lot of mail, a lot of emails, a lot of phone calls about the issues of the day. And if I had to name one issue that's the #1 issue on people's minds in terms of the email traffic, phone traffic we're getting in the office, it's the issue of illegal immigration. Right now, Congress is considering, has been and is considering legislation dealing with reforming the immigration process. And people think, candidly, that we've lost control of our borders. What do you think about that?
Glenn, I agree that since I've been in Congress, neither the Clinton administration nor the Bush administration has done what I think the people of the 3rd District want done, and that is to protect and secure the borders, both the borders between America and Canada, America and Mexico. And you and I both know, because the people have communicated, as you said, with us, that there's more concern about between 8,000 and 10,000 illegals coming across the border between America, Mexico, and Central and South America, that we don't know who they are. I mean, we have our troops, and God bless them, in Iraq fighting terrorism. How do we know that some of these coming across each and every week, there might be some terrorists in that group? We want this administration to do a better job of enforcing and securing the borders.
Now, how many illegal, does anyone have a good idea of how many immigrants are here in this country illegally?
Glenn, that's an interesting question, because we hear it frequently on the radio shows. People have guessed anywhere from 8 to 12 million illegals in this country at this time, anywhere between 8 and 12. And I want to go back to a point you made, and you're right. The House has passed a border security bill. We did that actually in the fall, right before Christmas. It's I think, a very good bill. It's a step in the right direction. It deals with security and responsibility. The Senate, as of this interview today, will be debating a Senate bill that many of our constituents are not happy with, and that's because it allows a form of amnesty. And the majority of those in the 3rd District, people in the 3rd District, as well as the state of North Carolina and throughout the United States, do not believe there should be any form of amnesty.
So by amnesty, what do you mean? You mean that people that are here illegally, that came here illegally, would get to stay?
Glenn, the Senate proposal says that if you're here legally and you identify yourself, and I think pay a $1,000 fine, and work in this country, and you've been identified for 3 years, I believe it's 3 years, then you will be accepted. You can apply to become an American citizen.
Now, what would the House bill, the bill that you said had passed, that was a good bill, people would, what would happen to people who are the 8 to 12 million people who are here in the country illegally? What would happen with them?
Well, our bill deals primarily with the laws of the land. If you're here legally, you should not be here. Secondly, our bill, and there are other parts of the bill, but the second point of the bill is that we say to the employer that you need to make sure that the person you have employed is here legally. And if not, there's a severe fine on the employer who does not double check and make sure that the worker is here legally.
Congressman, we've gotten communication from some of your constituents, people who are concerned about the lack of control of the border, but who feel that we've become dependent upon, the economy even in eastern North Carolina is dependent upon, to a certain extent, immigrant labor, particularly in the agriculture sector. How would you deal with the issue of migrant labor or immigrant labor being used in agriculture, say, in eastern North Carolina?
Glenn, I think most of us in Congress understand the importance of and the needs of particularly the agribusiness of this great nation. But we believe that, first of all, you've got to stop the invasion of 8 to 10,000 a week coming into this country. Once we secure our borders, then I think we can deal with these other issues that are important issues. Let me make that clear. But as long as we got 8 to 10,000 every week coming into America, no, I don't think we need to deal with the second part of what I think is very important until we can say to the American people, we're going to secure the borders. Once the borders are secured, then we need to deal with these other issues. I am for legislation that would allow people to come here legally to work, to increase the numbers of those who can come here legally. But until we secure the borders, I will not support any legislation that deals with the other important issues as it relates to those who come to this country to work. We must secure the borders first.
Well, you're a member of the House Armed Services Committee, and as such, you're privy to lots of classified and unclassified reports. Are you satisfied that the people that 8 to 10,000 a day, or however many it is that are coming across the border, are you satisfied? What percentage of those do you think are people that are people just coming here looking for work, and what do you think might be people that are up to other things?
Glenn, you know what's interesting about the 8 to 10,000 a week coming in is that we really don't know. But to be honest about it, I would assume that the majority of them, of the 8 to 10,000, are coming here to work to improve their lot, to improve their family's lot. But we don't know, and that's the problem. If it's one terrorist slipping in, and we know that Al-Qaeda has a presence in Central and South America. I think it's Venezuela where the president of Venezuela does not like the American people. There are other countries that have leadership like that. So bin Laden and his terrorist groups and cells, they are planning themselves in Central and South America. And why shouldn't they do that? Because they know they can get through the border to America without anyone stopping them. The Border Patrol is doing the very best that they can, but they're outnumbered. And Glenn, we have known of situations where the Mexican army has come right up to the border. I mean, there have not been any shots fired to kill anybody, but I don't know. We've got a serious problem, and the American people and the people of the 3rd District want this Congress to deal with it.
Just in the final seconds, how confident are you that Congress will and the President will reach some sort of agreement about how to deal with this border situation?
Glenn, this interview in April, I am not very confident at all that that will be done. But we'll wait and see. But we're not going to accept any bill from the Senate that has any type of amnesty in it at all. Glenn, we're about finished. I want to thank you. I want to thank David Walker for being on the show today. And I want to say to the people of the 3rd District, thank you for the privilege to serve you. And may God please bless our men and women in uniform and bless their families. Thank you for being with us today, and God bless America. Thank you.
Thank you for taking the time to join us for Washington Watch. If you would like to contact Congressman Jones, you're welcome to write to your Greenville office at 1105C Corporate Drive, Greenville, North Carolina, 27858, or call toll-free at 1-800-351-1697. You may also contact the Washington, D.C. office at the following address: 422 Cannon House Office Building, Washington, D.C. 20515, or please call 202-225-3415.